It was just another birthday. The table was full. Laughter rang out, and the clinking of cutlery mingled with the noise of the television in the living room. But he felt as if he were watching everything from outside. Sitting at the head of the table, as tradition dictates, he smiled at everyone. That automatic, somewhat rehearsed smile that you learn after spending so much time trying to please without being noticed. His wife circulated among the guests with the kindness that everyone praised. She talked to his brother, laughed at old jokes, poured wine as if nothing in the world was out of place. But when she passed him and lightly touched his shoulder, that was all. A touch. No warmth, no intention. Just physical presence. His son was quieter than usual. He fiddled with his cell phone under the table, pretending no one was looking. But he saw, and it was worse than if the boy had yelled or fought with him, because his son's silence came from the same place as his. That feeling that no one was really there, even though they were. That's when he noticed. No one looked at him for more than 2 seconds. It was as if he was there just for the sake of it, going through the motions. The cake, the birthday wishes, the photos, everything as it should be. But no one was really celebrating him. It was his birthday, but he didn't feel present. He heard comments about work, soccer, end-of-year plans. But no one asked, "And you, are you okay?" No one looked him in the eye like they used to, like they did when there was still something new about him. And in the middle of that crowded room, he felt the cruelest absence of all, being among those he loves, and no longer being loved. He pretended he needed to go to the bathroom. He locked himself in, looked at his reflection in the mirror, and asked himself silently, when did I stop existing in my own life? He didn't cry, he didn't despair, he just felt, and that at that moment was already too much. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first it was just a nuisance here and there, a strange way of hearing himself speak in the middle of a conversation, a silly discomfort when he saw a photo of himself that someone had posted. But then it became a habit. He watched himself all the time, not with pride, with suspicion. It was as if he were living on a stage, as if an invisible audience were judging his every gesture, every silence, every stutter. And worst of all, the audience was himself, watching everything from the outside, like someone watching a video of themselves and only noticing what's wrong. Their posture, their expression, their slightly awkward speech. This feeling of being watched, even when alone, stuck with him like a weight. Sartre called it the gaze of the other. He couldn't even remember where he had read that, but it made sense. It was like peeking through a keyhole and suddenly realizing that someone saw you, and you freeze. You lose your train of thought. You become a character in your own story. He started to demand more of himself, to be too hard on himself. Every day became a report card, where he went wrong, where he faltered, where he fell short. His head became a poorly run company, full of unattainable goals and angry internal meetings. Deep down, he knew he was trying to fit into an ideal, a model of a man who may not even exist, strong, calm, productive, admirable. And every time he wasn't that, and that happened every single day, the slap came. You're failing. There was no rest, not even in the good times. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, his heart racing without knowing why. And only after a while would he realize he was thinking again, going over what he said in a meeting, whether he was rude to his son, whether his wife thought he was too cold at dinner. Everything became a reason for judgment. He was no longer a guy trying to improve. He was a defendant awaiting sentencing. He demanded things of himself as if he hated himself, as if he wanted to get rid of the current version of himself, to see if one day someone better would be born in his place. And the worst part was that he realized it. He knew he was being cruel. He knew it wasn't fair. But even his attempts to lighten the load became a reason for more guilt. Are you trying to apologize now? How convenient. It was a prison where the cell was made of mirrors. There were days when he looked at his dog with envy, real envy. The animal would lie down on the living room floor, stretch, scratch its ear with its paw, and then sleep as if there were no tomorrow. Nothing seemed to bother it. Not the noise from the street, not the news, not even its own head. Because of course dogs don't have that, a head that never stops. And he thought, what must it be like to live like that? Just be, without demanding anything of himself, without thinking about whether he had disappointed anyone, whether he had said something stupid at the meeting, whether he was aging properly. Just get up, eat, sleep, and play, without having to justify himself all the time. He couldn't do that anymore. How long had it been since he had a day that just happened? Everything he did felt heavy, a sense of observation, as if he were the only living being with a camera rolling 24 hours a day, recording everything so he could sit down later and review it, frame by frame, to see where he went wrong. It was as if consciousness had ruined everything. He remembered a book by Cioran that he had read, half by chance, half out of desperation. There was a sentence that stuck with him. I learned this and I didn't want to. Simple as that. Because once you understand that maybe life doesn't really have a why, that maybe all of this, work, routine, marriage, goals, is just a way to pass the time. How do you go back? How do you go back to believing that it's okay just to exist? He tried. I swear he tried. But his mind always returned to the same place. What if the search for meaning is just a fancy distraction from facing the void? What if he already knew deep down that nothing was ever going to click? He just didn't have the courage to accept it yet. These thoughts came on strong, especially in the early hours of the morning. When the house was silent and the dog slept at his feet, he felt a strange pain, which was neither physical nor emotional. It was existential, a lack of grounding, an emptiness with a name and a shape and an echo. But even so, he didn't give up, because inside him there was still a little something left, a kind of silent stubbornness, like a candle that's almost out but insists on staying lit, just out of spite. A part of him whispered, calm down, there's something there. Not now, maybe, but there is. So he took a deep breath. He stroked his dog's head, who didn't even move, and let the silence take over. Not as an escape, but as a refuge. Because as much as it seemed like he was losing the war, at least now he knew the war existed. The problem with thinking too much is that you start to see the cracks. And once you see them, there's no unseeing them. It was during a casual conversation with a childhood friend that he realized this. They were reminiscing about the past, their adventures, the silly things they did as kids. And suddenly, in the middle of a laugh, a simple question came up. Do you still believe that life rewards those who do everything right? He didn't know how to answer. Not there, not then. But that phrase stuck with him. Because if he had been honest, he would have said, I don't think so. Or worse, I don't think I ever believed it. I just pretended I did. The idea that everything makes sense in the end. He had bought into it, like everyone else. Study, get married, have children, work hard, endure, because at some point something would make it all worthwhile. Recognition, relief, a peaceful day, anything. But what came was more exhaustion, more demands, more of a feeling of always being behind, even though he was where they told him he should be. That's when he started to have doubts, and disappointment came, as these things do, slowly but without asking permission. And suddenly, everything that was beautiful before turned out to be kind of fake. The speeches, the advice, even his own beliefs. He no longer believed in happy endings, at least not the way they told it in the movies. Not in soulmates, not in find your passion and you'll never work again. He thought it was all emotional marketing, and he felt angry for having believed it for so long. But that wasn't even what hurt the most. It was realizing that in part, he still wanted to believe. That feeling that the world has some meaning is necessary, that even a lie can warm you more than brutal silence. Disillusioned, that was the word. It was as if the sparkle had been taken out of everything, not because of tragedy or trauma, but because of lucidity. And that was the cruelest part. There was no drama, no tears, just a cold truth. Maybe life doesn't owe anyone anything. He didn't feel special or wronged, just too awake. And ironically, that was what kept him going. Because if he couldn't believe in ready-made promises anymore, maybe he could invent something else, something more real, smaller, but possible. He didn't know what that was yet, but he was willing to look for it, even if it was in the dark, even if it hurt. He woke up before the alarm. His body was still tired, but sleep refused to return. He opened his eyes and lay there, staring at the ceiling as if trying to find meaning in the cracks. Next to him, his wife slept on her back, breathing lightly, distant, not in meters, but in worlds. There were times when he woke up and looked at her as one looks at home. Now, she was just another body sharing the same mattress. He got up quietly. He passed his son's room, the door ajar. He saw his small foot hanging out from under the covers and felt that familiar tightness, a love so great it seemed to hurt. But mixed in with that was fear, the fear of no longer being seen, of having become the kind of father who is present but absent at the same time, the kind who says everything's fine even when it's not. He went to the kitchen. The whole house seemed to breathe in a way he no longer understood. He sat down at the table with a cup of cold coffee from the day before, as if that forgotten liquid were a perfect symbol of his own life. He looked around. Walls with old photos, furniture with small cracks, marks of time that no one else noticed. Everything was there, in the same place as always, except him. He picked up a random piece of paper, an old pharmacy advertisement perhaps, and he wrote, with a pen that was failing, but with a clearer head than he had had in a long time. I spent years trying to be strong, so strong that no one else saw when I broke inside. I was the quiet husband, the predictable father, the reliable man. I did everything right, as I was told, but no one warned me that being all that could erase me. Today I realize that I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. I'm not leaving, I'm finding myself, because if I stay here the way I am, I'm already gone. He read it, reread it. He didn't cry. He just folded the paper and left it on the table next to the dirty plate from the previous night's dinner. A small gesture, but perhaps the most genuine he had made in a long time. He put on his coat and left. He walked to the park, that park, where years ago he held the saddle of his son's bike while he tried to balance. He remembered her voice saying, "Take it easy," his laughter when he finally managed to ride on his own. On that wooden bench, he saw everything like an old movie playing in his head. The promises, the falls, the new beginnings. He sat in the same spot. It was raining, that fine, cold drizzle that no one respects. But he stayed. He let the rain wet his face, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to wipe it away. That mixture of rain and emotion was real. It was his. And in that wet silence, there was no epiphany. There was no solution. There was only presence. The rain had let up, but the ground was still shiny, reflecting the streetlights like broken mirrors. He walked back slowly, without looking at his phone, in no hurry to get there. The letter was written, the pain was exposed. Now all that was left was the aftermath. When he opened the door to his house, silence embraced him. But there was something different about it, a kind of silence that was less cold, less oppressive, a silence that seemed attentive. The kitchen light was on. On the table was the piece of paper he had left, folded but disturbed. Someone had read it. He knew this even before he saw his wife, sitting on the sofa, her body hunched as if she too was carrying an invisible letter inside her chest. She was holding a mug, but she wasn't drinking. She was just sitting there, waiting. When she saw him, she didn't look away. She didn't smile either. But her eyes, said it all. I read it. And more than that, they silently asked, "Are you still there?" He took a deep breath, walked over to her, and sat down beside her. They didn't touch right away. There was no rush. There was time. After a long silence, she spoke, low, hoarse, as if she still didn't know if she could. "Why didn't you say anything before?" He swallowed hard. Because he didn't know how. Because he thought it was his job to hold on. Because the world doesn't teach men to ask for help. It teaches them to hold on tight until no one else notices they're drowning. She rested her head on his shoulder, and in that small gesture, something broke. Not in a bad way. It broke like dams break, not homes. He was no longer the pillar. He was, at last, part of the house. They stayed there until the coffee grew cold. They didn't solve everything. They didn't promise anything. But they were sitting next to each other for the first time in a long time, together. And that, at that moment, was more than enough. If this story spoke to you, if at any point you felt that it described something of your own, an unspoken pain, a familiar silence, then this channel is yours too. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. This small gesture allows these stories, these pains and reconnections to reach more people who live exactly this kind of invisibility. People who hold the world together and forgot themselves in the process. And if you want to strengthen this work even more, consider leaving a donation, whatever you can afford. This channel only exists because some people choose to support it. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps keep alive the mission of telling stories that, more than entertaining, reflect. Stories that whisper, "Are you still there?" Because we are. Thank you so much for being here. And if you've made it to the end, maybe it's because, on some level, you're also trying to come back inside. And that's already a form of starting over. Write, "I believe," to show your strength.